Welcome. My name is Paul Wallace. I'm a capital markets writer at The Banker, and I'm here with Jacques Cailloux, the chief European economist at Nomura. Jacques, welcome.
Hello.
How optimistic or pessimistic are you about the economic situation in Europe at the moment?
Well, I remain pretty pessimistic about the outlook for the European economy. It's easy to get quite negative about the region, but in fact, I don't think there are many grounds to be optimistic at the current juncture. From a financial market standpoint, it's very clear that the market is sounding quite positive around the region, but from an economic standpoint, it's very, very difficult to find any signs of life in the system. We're seeing that no signs of stabilization, in fact, in the short term, and the pace of contraction is actually quite worrying.
So it's a pretty bleak outlook.
Yes, absolutely. And we're seeing that from both the consumer and the corporate sector. There's a lot of anxiety around the idea of spending. I think these consumers and the corporates focusing on deleveraging and also concerned about the whole infrastructure or architecture of the monetary union at this stage.
What was your take on the Cypriot bailout? Do you think that was a wasted opportunity to instill confidence in the eurozone?
Well, I think there are very important lessons to be taken out of the Cypriot situation. So number one, I think the crisis management toolkit is still falling short of what is needed. Speed was obviously lacking, and the iteration process was very disappointing, especially in light of a process which was so lengthy and having such an outcome in the first round of the bailout. The second lesson, I think, which is also very important, is that the resolution of the Cypriot situation probably is a template for future resolution. It's clearly not a template for other countries because every country is different. But what it tells us is that we moved essentially from a situation of bailout to bail-in. And I think the whole architecture around banking resolution, the whole architecture around fiscal union will probably be around the idea of bailing in more than bailing out in the future. And it's essentially about the legacy assets, and that's the key problem still that the euro area has to face. And dealing with the legacy asset will probably be more about taking losses at the local level rather than sharing those losses.
How do you think that Cypriot bailout could have been handled better? What do you think? What structure do you think they could have used instead of the one that they eventually
well, I think
did?
The issue was obviously it could have been dealt with in a more timely fashion. I think the warning signals were clearly there for quite some time. I mean, there was the opportunity, in fact, to deal with Cyprus at the time of the Greek bailout, given that most of the losses were incurred from the Greek haircuts imposed on the sovereign bonds at the time. So one could have dealt with Cyprus at the same time as Greece. The knock-on effect would have been much less pronounced. We know these domino effects being in the system, and Cyprus was clearly a contagion story from Greece. I think as well, in terms of the resolution around the banking sector, I think it was pretty clear that one should have immediately understood the idea of deposit guarantees above 100. And even if it was played out through a levy rather than a haircut, I think it's very surprising that there was no wake-up call during those negotiations that a levy could have been seen as a haircut as it ended up being seen.
Why do you think it is that corporate investment in Europe is so low at the moment? And do you, from your conversations with businesses, do you see it picking up anytime soon?
Well, it feels to me that the corporate sector remains extremely cautious at this stage. Low capacity utilization rates, low order books, and in some countries relatively high inventories suggest that this is an environment where the corporate sector is not ready to spend. It's in a wait-and-see mode. Some parts of the corporate sector are also suffering from access to credit. That's true more for the SME sector rather than large corporates. But the SME sector essentially make up most of the job creation and of the total amounts of companies inside the euro area. So it is a very, very significant sector. And in that context, it seems quite difficult to see a pickup in corporate investment anytime soon. I think there are also question marks from larger corporates that have export markets around the euro area, about the outlook of some of these stressed countries, and in a sense the outlook for governance both locally and at the euro area level, i.e. what sort of coordination are we going to have? Is there a genuine political risk still in the system that could bring about additional uncertainty and thus weak demand from those countries? And I think that's the message we're essentially hearing from many corporates.
Lastly, do you worry that the economic situation in Europe is so bad that we could see extreme parties coming to power in major economies like France, Italy, and Germany?
I think we can start first from the good news, in a sense. If you had told me 2 years ago the euro area is going to be in a deep recession for the next 2 years, we're going to see a major increase in unemployment, the debate around austerity is going to gain pace, and anxiety around additional austerity is going to increase, what sort of landscape would you imagine? And I think that I would have said that social unrest would have probably come to the fore. And we've had some episodes of that, but it's been rather limited. And I think that's the good news. It seems that there seems to be more buying from the population about the need for an adjustment, the fact that the last 10 years or 15 years need to be addressed. And so there is some openness, I think, for the population at large to take some of the pain and move on. That's the good news. Having said that, I think we're seeing signs that there is some fatigue in the system from the population about that adjustment. And we're seeing, obviously, and we've seen it in Greece, we've seen it in Italy, we're seeing it in France, we're seeing it in Germany, we're seeing this rise of sort of populism. In some places it's less, in some places it's more pronounced, which reflects, obviously, the fact that parts of the population are starting to be unhappy about their economic situation. They don't see any prospects for return for growth, and they're looking for alternatives. And the alternative for Germany, this Alternative für Deutschland party, which was created only a few weeks ago, a few months ago, does show that there is room for those populist parties even to come up in countries where this would have been unthinkable only a few months ago. So it's changing the landscape. And for now, I don't think that Europe is providing any clear message to the population that the future of Europe is defined so clearly that people should embrace that project again. And that's a worrying trend.
Jacques, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.